Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Welcome to the World Over Live. We've got lots to cover this week. A global economic slowdown is upon us. What's driving this international phenomena? And the Pope offered his own opinions today in Madrid. We'll ask Father Robert Sirico, president of the Acton Institute, to unpack it for us. And we'll get into the headlines and cultural news of the week. And why are two American bishops suing their home state? We'll bring you my exclusive interview with one of the bishops later in the show. And the Pope is in Madrid for World Youth Day. We'll bring you some excerpts. If you'd like to be part of the show, the number 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally, 205-271-2980. And drop us a line, an email at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Pope Benedict XVI began his 4-day visit to Madrid for World Youth Day on Thursday. After being received by King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia at the Madrid airport, the Holy Father was enthusiastically greeted by hundreds of thousands of young people from around the world who lined the streets of central Madrid. They joined him for the traditional World Youth Day welcoming ceremony at the Plaza de Cibeles. Pope Benedict immediately sent a message of encouragement to the young participants, saying, "Let nothing and no one take away your peace. Do not be ashamed of the Lord." The Pope continued, recognizing the challenges that face young people today, specifically a prevailing superficiality, consumerism, and hedonism, the widespread banalization of sexuality, the lack of solidarity, and corruption. The participants of World Youth Day, he said, have, quote, a special opportunity to share the richness of their cultures and experiences and motivate each other along a journey of faith and life in which some think they are alone or ignored in their daily existence. More on World Youth Day later in the show. Meanwhile, speaking from World Youth Day, Bishop Arthur Roche of Leeds said the recent rioting in Britain by young people is a result in no small part of a consumerist society that's lost its sense of values and has, in fact, quote, lost its Christianity. Bishop Roche said the young rioters are very unhappy, disenchanted, and in need of God. In comparing the rioters to the pilgrims of World Youth Day, he regretted that British media were not in Madrid to, quote, see young people full of joy, great generosity, in such contrast to what we've seen in Britain recently, end quote. And an Orthodox church was one of a series of fatal attacks across Iraq on Monday. In the early morning hours, a bomb severely damaged St. Ephraim's Syrian Orthodox Church in Kirkuk. The church was empty at the time. The bombing was among 42 apparently coordinated attacks targeting civilians and security forces in several Iraqi cities. Suicide bombs, car bombs, IEDs, and shootings killed at least 89 and wounded 300 more. It was the bloodiest day of violence in Iraq this year. Security officials are blaming al-Qaeda for the attacks. No group, however, has yet to claim responsibility. The bombing of St. Ephraim's is the third church attack in Kirkuk in just 2 weeks. And in Oregon, the legal effort to convict the Vatican for repeatedly reassigning an abusive priest has failed. Attorney for abuse victims Jeffrey Anderson filed a lawsuit in 2002 claiming the Vatican was negligent in allowing the multiple transfers of the late Andrew Ronan, who was a Servite priest some 50 years ago. However, documents submitted to the Oregon court show that the Vatican was only aware of Ronan's abuse and shuttling after he applied for and was promptly granted laicization. That was in 1966. After 7 years, or rather some 7 years after, documents show that Ronan's Servite superiors first transferred him to Chicago from Ireland when abuse allegations surfaced there. His superiors moved him soon after to Portland, Oregon. The plaintiff in the Oregon case was abused in 1965, the year before the Holy See became aware of Ronan's abuse. The Vatican's U.S. Attorney, Jeffrey Lina, said that the accusations against the Holy See are not only false, but also calumnious. He further charged that the plaintiff's lawyers, Anderson et al., never had any evidence to support the accusations and nevertheless chose to misuse the legal system as a vehicle to pursue a broader agenda that misled the public and wasted considerable resources, end quote. And a research report released this week has identified a new threat to children: cohabitation. Published by the National Marriage Project, the report cited U.S. government statistics and the work of 18 researchers. The numbers are alarming. They show that children living with unmarried parents are more likely to suffer from abuse or neglect by an almost 9-to-1 margin compared to married parents. They are also likely to have psychological problems by a 4-to-1 margin. And cohabitating parents are more likely to break up by a 2-to-1 margin. Those children are also more likely to underperform in school. Since 1970, the U.S. has had a 12-fold explosion of cohabitating couples. The study entitled "Why Marriage Matters" asserts that cohabitation by unmarried parents has become the largest unrecognized threat to the quality and stability of children's family lives. And my new book with Laura Ingram of The I Zing, America's Cultural Decline, from muffin tops to body shots, is enjoying its 5th week on the New York Times bestseller list. Many thanks to all of you who joined our cultural intervention. And if you didn't, what are you waiting for? It's an insightful and fun romp through the culture and all that ails it. As you know, we've been conducting our own little contest here, and this is this week's Zing, the winning Zing from Gene Olimpo, and he writes, "One time I was on a train and heard an odd sound. It was very loud. I tried to ignore it, but it went on for such a long time that it started irritating me. After a while, it sounded like a hammer clanging an anvil. Clip, 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 clip. So I looked around to see what was going on, and it turned out to be a guy across the aisle and a few seats back, clipping his toenails. It was so disgusting, I felt like going back there and tossing him off the train while we were still moving." We'll be sending Gene a copy of The I Zing. Gene has to work on the charity, but we'll forgive him that. And if you have a zing of your own, a complaint about something you saw or experienced in the culture and hopefully confronted, send it to Raymond at raymondarroyo.com. Put Zing in the subject line, and if we like it, we'll send you a free copy of the book or audiobook. Up next, Father Robert Sirico joins us to comment on the latest headlines and the cultural stories of the week. And we'll take your calls when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
The world is in the grips of an economic slowdown with catastrophic consequences. Markets are wildly fluctuating. What's really going on? To discuss and to comment on the Pope's comments this week at World Youth Day and much more is Father Robert Sirico, the president of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and a world over contributor. Father Robert, thank you for being back. Let's talk for a moment about what's happening in Europe and then bring in the United States, what's happening here. 75% of Europeans are now saying they want out of the EU. Yeah. The markets in Europe are wildly fluctuating, mostly going down. Right. We're experiencing the same thing here in the United States, 1,000 points up, 500 points down. I mean, what is going on in these world markets? What's happening?
You want one word?
Yeah.
Debt. It's all of the debt. You know, it's the chickens coming home to roost. It's the belief that we only owe it to ourselves, so we can just keep satiating our constituencies by making more and more commitments to various kinds of legacy programs or entitlement programs. And now finally, the crunch is coming. You know, Milton Friedman said a number of years ago that the euro would not survive its first crisis. And we may be seeing the fulfillment of that prophecy now, because what you have is the least productive economies not being forced to take responsibility for their debt, for their policies, and the more productive having to subsidize that, but now the more productive look like they want out of it.
Let's talk for a moment about what we're seeing in London. These riots continue. Now, one piece I read just the other day says, one journalist says the reason for the violence that violence kicked off in the London suburb of Tottenham is because, quote, that area is getting 75% cuts in the public services. Is that what's happening here? Are these poor people reacting to cuts in their welfare checks and, in their services?
I think it's far more complex than simply a set of cuts. And I would question, by the way, that 75% number, but leave that as it is. I think what you have has been a slow erosion of the ethical core of society, namely the family. And that has been augmented by the state taking over many of the roles that the family would have taken over. So now you can go from morning to night, a child can go from morning to night and be taken care of by the state, have breakfast, have lunch, have dinner, have snacks, have medical care, have psychological care, have guidance and sex education, all the rest of it, so that what was previously the role of the family, I mean, where are the families? Where are the parents of these children who are out there? And some of them are very young. And it's a stark contrast to the young people who have arrived in Madrid to greet the Holy Father.
Yeah, well, that's what that Bishop Roche was saying,
very good point.
who's over there. Now, what is the relationship, do you think, between the welfare state and the breakdown of family?
Well, the welfare state, among the different things that the welfare state does, is that it makes the role of the parent as the supporter and the unifier of the family less critical. So that you, in the name of solidarity and community, you have a breakdown of solidarity and community, a breakdown of responsibility, so that the father, in many cases, depending on the policies, is in effect invited out of the home. You have this increase of out-of-wedlock births. When children grow up without men in their lives, all kinds of problems result, as you cited from the study that was done, the National Institute for Marriage.
And this is only the beginning, I think, of some of these consequences.
I mean, think you're very right.
It all fits together. It's all one piece. The family,
it really is.
Morality, a sense of dignity and responsibility in a culture, and then what we're seeing and the after effects. Let's go to the Pope's comments. He made some comments on the way to Madrid that really have filled papers, blogs, and soon-to-be magazines all over the world. He commented on this economic crisis. We'll show you some B-roll of that. Here's what he had to say. The current crisis confirms what the previous crisis showed, that ethics are not something separate from the economy, but an internal, fundamental dimension of the economy. He goes on, the economy does not work merely by auto-regulation by the markets. On the contrary, it needs to be guided by ethics in order to be helpful to mankind. And then he sort of wrapped this up saying, economy must be based on human beings. Economy should not be measured upon the maximization of profit, but upon whether it serves each and everyone's well-being. It should include a sense of responsibility for others, and it will function properly only if it functions humanely and respects others. Now, Father, this sounds like when the Pope says the economy should not be measured upon by merely the maximization of profit, but whether it serves each and everyone's well-being. This sounds like a very managed economy.
Well, let's look at what the Pope is really saying. What he's saying is that at the core of the economy is the human person. You have no economy without human action, without human evaluation at some level. And in an economic sense, it's a subjective evaluation, the utility of the object being purchased or sold. But the broader point that the Pope is making is that you cannot separate man from the economy any more than you can separate ethics from man. So that the human person has to bring his value system, that the core of the economy has to be both anthropocentric and moral. And it is not a matter of the Pope being against profits as an indicator that you're doing what you plan to do, but it's this kind of depersonalization of the economy that he's objecting to.
I also want to invite our viewers and listeners, those of you listening to us on radio, the number 1-800-221-9460 and internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. We'll have a little time as we go on to get to some of your questions. If there's something you're reading out there, something you're seeing in the headlines you want us to comment on, we're happy to do so. Or if you want to if you have a question about anything we've discussed thus far, give us a call, drop us an email. Let's talk for a moment about picking up on this. He said at one moment, the economy does not work merely by auto-regulation by the markets.
Right.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that a lot of what you've been teaching for so many years and so many others are that the market has its own morality, if you will. It will correct itself. The Pope seems to be saying...
I have certainly never taught that.
Okay.
The market does not have a morality as a market. It needs a morality that's exogenous to the mere calculating part of the economy. Man is homo economicus, but he's not merely homo economicus. He's not just economic man. Everything we do, we bring our whole selves into it. We can't separate ourselves. What the Pope is criticizing is what might be called radical capitalism. The notion that what is good or bad is determined by the market. And that is not certainly what the Church teaches. It's certainly not what I have been advocating all these years.
Right, and this is what John Paul II
But it's a common misunderstanding.
Yeah, John Paul II in Centesimus Annus talked about
Precisely.
this radical capitalism, but he distinguished that from a free market and a democratic capitalism.
Yes, exactly. He says that capitalism, the good capitalism, though he prefers to call it a free economy or business economy or private economy, is that which is characterized as having an ethical core within a juridical framework. So that is what we're talking about in terms of the free economy. Anybody using the Pope's statements here to say that he's against the free economy is simply misusing what Pope Benedict is saying.
Warren Buffett wrote a piece in the New York Times, which got picked up everywhere, suggesting that the mega rich and those who are very wealthy have an obligation to pay more in taxes. The administration is saying that right now, that the wealthy should pay more and that this will cure the debt crisis. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the very wealthy, according to the Congressional Budget Office, this is a point made by a colleague of mine at the Acton Institute, Dr. Sam Gregg, indicate that some 70% of all tax revenue comes from the rich. Beyond that, Mr. Buffett is free to give away a lot of his money to the government if that's what he wants to do. And one might also question all of the insurance schemes that help preserve the wealth of his investors. Preserve it from what? From taxation. So it's a very odd thing that Mr. Buffett is making.
Well,
here.
years ago, people will remember he donated an enormous amount, I think all of his profits, or a large majority of his personal profits, to the Gates Foundation to avoid
taxation.
further taxation.
Yeah.
So none of this sort of adds up. I mean, personally, he's not
really
the best poster boy of paying more taxes. Let's go to the phones. Tony from Rhode Island, what's your question?
Yes, what I'm wondering is what role abortion and the contraceptive mentality in Europe and the United States has in creating the economic woes that we're experiencing, since the reduction of population would seem to reduce supply and demand, taxpayers and such, the ability to grow an economy. And I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Great question.
Now, that's a very good question. It's a difficult question to quantify because the people aren't here, obviously, right? But here's what we do know. We do know what John Paul the Great, or Blessed John Paul II said in Centesimus Annus, man is man's greatest resource. So to eliminate, to prevent, to destroy the human person devastates the economy because the economy has to be centered on human action and human decision making. So that's a very good point.
And this is why places like Europe, and you know, the Pope is in Madrid, which is seen as the abortion capital of Europe.
Yes.
when you see that kind of population disparity, you have all of these elderly people reliant on government programs and government support without a young base contributing.
And then you have retirement schemes that are predicated on more and more young people contributing for the retirement of the elderly. Besides which, you have this kind of almost subliminal resentment that so many people have been eliminated from society by abortion, by contraception, in the minds of these young people. Their siblings, for instance, who may have been eliminated. So there's, I can imagine, a kind of subliminal resentment as well going on.
Kind of a latent, resentment that they're not even aware of.
Right.
But it's there.
Right.
I want to play for you a little excerpt of the Holy Father. This is from his welcoming ceremony today in Madrid. Listen to this, then we'll comment. We'll continue to take your calls. Call in or send us your email. Listen.
Dear young people, Pope Benedict goes on, listen closely to the words of the Lord, that they may be for you spirit and life, roots which nourish your being, a rule of life which likens us, poor in spirit, thirsting for justice, merciful, pure in heart, lovers of peace, to the person of Christ. Listen regularly, he says, every day, as if he were the one friend who does not deceive, the one with whom we wish to share the path of life. Of course, you know that when we do not walk beside Christ, our guide, we get lost on other paths, like the path of our blind and selfish impulses, or the path of flattering but self-serving suggestions, deceiving, fickle, which leave emptiness and frustration in their wake. Use these days, Pope Benedict goes on, to know Christ better and to make sure that rooted in him, your enthusiasm and happiness, your desire to go further, to reach the heights, even God himself, always holds a sure future, because the fullness of life has already been placed within you. Let that life grow with divine grace, generously, without half measures, as you remain steadfast in your aim for holiness. In the face of our weaknesses, which sometimes overwhelm us, the Pope says, we can rely on the mercy of the Lord, who is always ready to help us again, and who offers us pardon in the sacrament of penance. If you build on solid rock, not only your life will be solid and stable, but it will also help project the light of Christ, shining upon those of your own age and upon the whole of humanity, presenting a valid alternative to all those who have fallen short because the essentials in their lives were inconsistent, to all those who are content to follow fashionable ideas. They take shelter in the here and now, forgetting true justice, or they take refuge in their own opinions instead of seeking the simple truth. Indeed, Pope Benedict continues, there are many who, creating their own gods, believe they need no roots or foundations other than themselves. They take it upon themselves to decide what is true or not, what is good and evil, what is just and unjust, who should live and who can be sacrificed in the interests of other preferences, leaving each step to chance with no clear path, letting themselves be led by the whim of each moment. These temptations, the Pope says, are always lying in wait. It is important not to give in to them, because in reality they lead to something so evanescent, like an existence with no horizons, a liberty without God. We, on the other hand, know well that we have been created free in the image of God, precisely so that we may be in the forefront of the search for truth and goodness, responsible for our actions, not mere blind executives, but creative co-workers in the task of cultivating and beautifying the work of creation. God is looking for a responsible interlocutor, the Pope says, someone who can dialogue with him and love him. Through Christ we can truly succeed, and established in him we give wings to our freedom. Is this not the great reason for our joy? Isn't this the firm ground upon which to build the civilization of love and life, capable of humanizing all of us? Dear friends, says Pope Benedict, be prudent and wise. Build your lives upon the firm foundation which is Christ. This wisdom and prudence will guide your steps. Nothing will make you fear, and peace will reign in your hearts. Then, he says, you will be blessed and happy, and your happiness will influence others. They will wonder what the secret of your life is, and they will discover that the rock which underpins the entire building and upon which rests your whole existence is the very person of Christ, your friend, your brother and Lord, the Son of God incarnate, who gives meaning to all the universe.
Well, that was Pope Benedict from earlier today, World Youth Day. He's at the welcoming ceremony, a beautiful welcoming ceremony there in the plaza. I love the line that he's calling these young people to be creative co-workers with Christ.
Right.
Really interesting formulation there.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the Pope not speaking down. Even his vocabulary is an exalted vocabulary. He calls them to. It's reminiscent of all of those encounters that John Paul II had, though very different in style, where John Paul would say, don't settle for mediocrity. I like this phrase that he used where he says, we are seeking for a God who wants to dialogue with us and whom we can love. He's calling these young people based on their own idealism to a high ideal, to utilize that idealism for the good, to exalt in who they are, to tell them what they know, even though they know that it's difficult to live that way.
There's a lot of controversy around the edges of this visit because of the secularity occurring within Madrid and all over Europe.
This is the template for, how many of these have we covered? These various kinds of, this is the template. You can actually write out the 5 or 6 things that are going to be the controversial issues. How much is this going to cost? And what a waste of money this is going to be. And let's focus on these 2,000 demonstrators and oh, well, they're not sure they're going to be that many people actually show up. Well, there are 1 million people there now. There's not a rock group in the world that can draw 1 million people the way the Pope can.
In the blazing heat of summer in Madrid.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hot. And
to come and see this 86-year-old man who is talking about theology.
And not light theology.
And not light theology.
Let's go to Marianne from New York. What's your question, Marianne? Then we'll get back into the World Youth Day controversies. Go ahead, Marianne.
Hi, Raymond. How are you, Raymond?
Very well. What you got?
My question is for Father Sirico, and it's in regards to the earlier statements about ethics and the economy. And I perfectly and wholeheartedly support the Pope's view that corporations and businesses should put people ahead of profits. But how can that be done without it being perceived as being socialistic? And how do you encourage business leaders to put people ahead of profits, but to the mutual benefit of us all? And thank you very much, and God bless.
Great question.
Yeah, and the question is the mutual benefit.
Right.
You have to put people before profits because the end of business is people and the betterment of people. But remember, you can't have profits without productive people.
Right.
So the tough question is, how do you do that? You don't do this by mere legislation. You can have various kinds of incentives that encourage people, but what you do is form the core. It's kind of what the Pope was speaking about to the young people in Madrid, that men and women in business need to see that what they're doing is a vocation from God, and that there's a responsibility beyond the quarterly statement, beyond their profitability, to see it holistically rather than just in a utilitarian
Well,
fashion.
again, that notion of creative co-workers,
Yes.
that everybody plays a part. This isn't,
Precisely.
the corporation sort of carrying people along. No, everybody works together. The corporation has a responsibility, so does the employee.
Right.
And there's a Monsignor in Brooklyn who does incredible work, Monsignor Marino. With a group called
He's
Resources.
a good friend of mine.
He's very innovative. I see it as an entrepreneurial, entirely faith-based approach to helping immigrants who come to these
and
lands.
gets no government money.
None at all.
And make sure they all learn English. That's one of the important things he emphasizes.
And he highlighted that wonderful teaching of John Paul, that work serves man, not man serving work.
Right.
And the whole notion of that, but that work is important and central to the life of man. And I think this is a very complex question, but our caller, Marianne, raises an important point. How does the corporation stay in business? How can it remain open if it doesn't have an eye on profits? I mean, all these families are reliant on the corporation remaining solvent.
The Pope is absolutely not saying don't have an eye on profits. That's not at all the point. You won't find that in any of his statements. He's saying that there is something in addition. There's something more than profits. Profits can't be the only regulator of an economy, because the human person is more than his economic reality.
And that you can't put the profits ahead of people.
Of course not.
Including your own well-being, which people often do. They just destroy their lives,
and that's the warning, the materialism, the consumerism. So it's not to say that we don't live in a material world. It's not to say that we don't consume. It's to say that we can't be consumed ourselves by the consumption, that we live for others. In the sense that we get so caught up with the tags and the logos and all of these things.
There's an email that just came in. It says, for you, is there any talk of rethinking the organization of the European Union? Is the European Union a given for ages to come? Donald from New Jersey.
Well, I think we're just beginning to see that kind of discussion emerge, and the economic crisis is going to bring those questions to a head. There's a difference between the European Union and a sense of Europe. And I think that's what we have to begin making the distinctions. The way this thing has been structured, I've criticized it because right from the Maastricht talks, they inverted the definition of subsidiarity so that the state had the first obligation. I think they could recreate a sense of an open, free market within Europe without having the kind of heavy government regulations that are required.
Well, and all the moral questions where they're just trumping the morality of each of these countries and basically legislating by fiat from a foreign territory. What the entire union will do, they're very varied. Their histories are complex. And
eliminating God from the whole history of Europe is utterly absurd.
Could you please ask how the Fed's loose monetary policy is contributing to the current crisis? Bill from San Antonio, Texas.
Well,
that's a big question, of course.
Well, it is, but it's also a very simple one. Every dollar you have in your pocket, every dollar you have in your savings is diminished in its buying power to the extent that the Fed runs the printing presses. That's the major cause of inflation. And they run the printing presses because this is what's called fiat money, because fiat, we know that term, yes, money. We would just make it. We just say yes to it.
Yeah, keep printing it.
And what ends up happening is the politicians, to the extent that they've made all of these commitments to various kinds of entitlement programs and can't tax anymore, and can't borrow anymore, will run the printing presses and diminish. This is one of the most insidious forms of government manipulation because it affects the poor first.
Right.
Those on fixed incomes are going to be most impacted by the diminishment of their savings.
I want to get to a couple of other things. I know a lot of you are writing in and you're on the phones. Hang on, I will get to the calls next, but there's some emails I need to touch first. This is someone, James writes, and he's not too pleased with some comments made here. Okay. Proportional taxation, he says, is based on a view of justice and fairness. Sadly, your program this evening seems to need the dignity and integrity of a respected economist like Paul Krugman. He clearly understands the present situation clearly.
Mr. Krugman has said emphatically that we're not spending enough, we're not borrowing enough. If this crisis, I mean, let's not lose our common sense. If we are agreed that this crisis we are facing is largely the result of overspending, of overborrowing, borrowing into the next generation and the generation after that, how do we solve that problem by borrowing more? I simply don't see it. What we need to do is release the productive capability of the nation rather than holding it down and weighing it down with more and more debt. I think that is utterly insane.
Yeah. Here's an interesting comment. This comes from Stuart, writing from London. And he says, Father and Raymond, a loss of faith in England means that right and wrong are whatever you decide.
Right.
So if you have the chance to loot whatever you want, why not? Most people here do not go to church. Most people here do not believe that voting changes their situation or anything. And thus, they're perfectly happy to reach out for whatever whatever they desire.
Sure, because the material is the only thing that really exists, so you have to get it.
And Stuart, writing from London, we should tell him the same thing is happening here with these flash mobs, which are there's nothing driving this but people texting each other and putting out a Twitter, and suddenly a mob shows up because they can, and they have no internal barrier telling them, you shouldn't do this. This is wrong.
I go back to the family. When a father in particular is present in a home who teaches, especially young boys, how to respect authority, that child internalizes a sense of responsibility, a sense of protecting the vulnerable. When that father is absent, the first time those young boys who are, now grown up and can overwhelm the mother, the first time they come in touch with a power over them is the police. And that's what you're having. The breakdown of the family is part and parcel of the breakdown of the economy and of the violence that we're seeing in society.
And at the same time, the thing that I find so fascinating, and this is just, forget a Catholic network or looking at this as a Catholic, just as a journalist looking at this. You've got all of these things breaking out, young people doing all these unspeakable things, and then you have 1 million young people gathering in the heat of Madrid, coming from all over the world, 193 nations, 200 confessionals open today for these young people. Why do you think these young people are coming? Taking the effort. They had bake sales. They're selling things off. They're cutting grass to gather the money to essentially go sleep on gym floors for days.
That's true.
To be near this man and hear his message.
In the heat. And going to confession, you mentioned that. This shows their interior accountability to an authority over themselves. They are not the master of their own destiny. They have a moral obligation and responsibility. I think because these young people understand that there's more to life than the sum total of the material parts. There's more to their existence than just having and consuming and having just so much fun.
And the reinforcement of having other people like-minded around you, people of faith, which they may not have at home, only, I think, encourages them when they return.
Reinforces all of that, and they'll bring it back. I think the church has been very wise to choose some of these very secular environments for these World Youth Days, because we've already heard now what happened several years ago in terms of vocations in Australia. I was there for that. And I think we're going to hear in another year or two what's going to happen in Spain.
Well, and this is the great gambit of John Paul II. He reached out to the young over this middle-aged group that he felt they've already gone their way, they're already inflexible. But this younger generation, he felt he had a chance to reach, and he did. And it continues through these World Youth Days. What do you make of the controversy? They're saying $72 million, this is too much. We're having an economic crisis here in Madrid. How dare the Pope and the Catholic Church spend this kind of taxpayer money on an event like this?
Well, they've already raised $23 million from Spanish businesses. The pilgrims are paying
44 million in
44 million. So there's your almost 70 million plus the other money, and I think it will put an added burden on the services in the same way that a tourist influx would.
Right.
But that's justifiable because these pilgrims are going to be spending money. They're going to be buying things. They're going to be eating out.
So the economic benefit's going to outweigh any public, public cost to the taxpayer.
Yes.
Very quickly, Sebastian, what's your question? 1 minute.
Yes. President Obama and Congress are saying going to try to create new jobs. What good is it creating new jobs when we send these jobs overseas and about 10 million people are out of work in this country? Why can't we bring those jobs back in this country this way and stimulate our economy? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Bob?
First of all, the government doesn't create jobs. Let's be very clear. Any money that the government will put that will pay people to do various things comes from the productive sector.
Well, you had Secretary Vilsack, who's the Agriculture Secretary this week, saying, wait a minute, more people are on food stamps, and that is a job creator because it's a stimulus to the economy because people are bagging groceries and people are working more. They have to work more in groceries because people are coming in with food
where did
stamps.
that money come from to provide that? I mean, that's the question. Well, it comes from productive people, and so that's that much less money in the economy that can be used for investment or other things.
Or growing new businesses.
But the question about international trade, we need to ask ourselves a very brutal and honest question. Why have we become so unproductive, or why do businesses think that they can get a better deal by going overseas? I think ultimately, by being able to create resources and products at less price and sell them here in the United States and other places throughout the world increases our own profitability.
The answer, I think, partially is what we heard from the Pope today. Creative co-workers, that's what we need. Yes. Innovation, and that's certainly been the hallmark of America. It's an innovative country that came up with new strategies, new things and services that people around the world needed and wanted.
Right, and envied and emulated now. Yeah. And we shouldn't be sad for that. The question is, remember that atmosphere that created that kind of productivity, that independence, that self-reliance is a cultural phenomenon. And to the extent that we're losing that sense of our culture.
And our faith.
And that's part of it. The faith is part of the culture. Alexis de Tocqueville in the middle of the 19th century saw this in the United States.
Very good. Father Robert Sirico, as always, thank you.
Great to be with you.
I wish we had more time. It's fantastic, and we'll do it more next time. For more on Father Robert Sirico and the work of the Acton Institute, visit acton.org. He gets into all of these, particularly these economic issues and the interplay between faith and the economy, which is a moral thing. We have to keep our eye on it. When we return, 2 American bishops are suing their home state over a piece of legislation. My interview with one of those bishops is straight ahead when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest has had a rough year. Deadly tornadoes touched down in his diocese a few months ago, and now he's one of 2 Catholic bishops suing the state of Alabama over a law that they consider detrimental to the church's mission. Here's my conversation with Bishop Robert Baker of Birmingham about his efforts to repair the damage done by the tornadoes there and the lawsuit that has been making headlines. Take a look. Good
to be with you, Raymond.
Your Excellency, there's a lot to talk about, lots of things happening. First of all, let's talk about the disaster relief, how those efforts are going. I know I was just in Alabama, and the devastation is still intense and severe.
You saw it firsthand. Well, we're at the point now of working with Habitat for Humanity, using some of our funds to help build houses. We know the Knights of Columbus have been part of that effort as well, and so that's kind of the stage we're moving toward. We help people get through the first levels of crisis, just survival, getting temporary housing, and now it's building houses and then providing the wherewithal for those houses. So we're working seriously in that regard. And I want to thank EWTN, Michael Warsaw, Jeff Hahn, yourself, for helping promote that effort for us as church to be responding to these important needs. And also the Knights of Columbus. We had a convention in Birmingham 2 days after the April 27th disaster, and we linked with the Knights, And you heard Carl Anderson say about the great work that was being done there. But in conjunction with us, we were able to rally the troops and rally the knights. So much good has happened with volunteer hours and efforts.
Now, part of the people I know you're helping are the immigrant population in the surrounding area of Birmingham that were touched by this tornado. They lost identification as well as all of their goods and in some cases their homes and places where they were living. What are you doing to reach out to them, and how is this new law passed by the Alabama legislature affecting their lives and your outreach to them?
Well, as of September 1st, the volunteers, and that would include the Knights of Columbus and our Catholic volunteers, will become criminals because of the new law. In effect, we are in some way harboring, helping, and concealing the identity of those people we're helping. Now, we don't ask, we don't tell, we just don't ask questions.
You help everybody who comes to you.
Anybody, in any faith. But a lot of the people we have been helping have been Hispanic, and we presume many undocumented. And with the new law, makes it criminal for us to do so. So we are joining together with myself, Archbishop Rhodey from Mobile, the Episcopal Bishop, Bishop Parsley of the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama, and also Bishop Williman from Northern Alabama. And we have a suit for an injunction to stop the enforcement of this before we would be arrested.
And the lawsuit would go, I mean, this law would go into effect in September.
In September, right.
And what does it say? I mean, it makes it illegal to even care. Does it make it illegal to care for these people medically when they're in medical distress?
Well, in effect, it's mainly the area of Section 13. Well, basically, in that area, it talks about concealing, harboring, or shielding, or attempting to conceal, harbor, or shield, or conspire to do so, an alien from detection in any place in the state, and then encouraging in any way, basically, or inducing an alien to come to or reside in this state. By helping them, our attorneys suggest that we are doing that. We transport or attempt to transport or conspire to transport. Our main argument would be this is all part of religion to assist people that come to us in need. And we would indicate that John, if someone who has worldly means sees a brother in need and refuses him compassion, how can the love of God remain in him? Children, let us love not in word or speech, but in deed and truth. We Christians have that sense of doing that. So it's part of what we are, what we're about. And the Knights of Columbus are a perfect example of people who do this very generously and help people of all different faiths. It becomes illegal for us to do what
So
the
you
gospel
see this as a religious liberty running into enforcement of immigration law.
Freedom of religion. We just think we're caught. Our attorneys tell us that, we have to cease and desist or we're violating the law. And, also that freedom of worship. When people come in their church, for example, after Mass, a lot of them have coffee and donuts. Well, that could be an infringement of this law. Now, there were, Raymond, provisions protecting us in the initial legislation that were put there by our lobbyists. And they were taken out. The only people protected, do-gooders, are first responders to something like a disaster
crisis,
in a crisis. First responders, not second. I think I heard Carl Anderson say we're second responders. That's problematic. Or people are protected are protection services like child protection from vulnerability there.
Right.
But the legislators chose those exceptions, but not the religious sector. And so we just have to go on record of saying there's a point we have to draw a line. Yes, we're not in favor of lifting the borders and protecting. We feel we need to protect the borders. We need to do all these things. We're in favor of seeing things like green cards, for worker cards for people coming to work here, done carefully. But we're also concerned about compassionate dealing with those people who are with us. Not a mean-spirited approach. So it's on the federal government. I think that we have to look to the federal government for legislation, and now, not to back off. And I understand President Obama just also entered into a court suit against Alabama legislation. But Christians should be the ones out front on this. We shouldn't wait for the government to tell us, what we can do or not. so beautifully Carl Anderson said, that the government is there to protect the rights of the people and the religious rights too. And the Constitution suggests not just freedom of religion or worship, but freedom of religious expression. That means what we're talking about here. So let's come about work in this direction of a compassionate approach and a reasonable one, and finally it is garner the support of our Catholic community across the country to push for this kind of legislation at the federal level that prevents me from being arrested as a criminal.
And what has been the reaction in the diocese? I imagine there are some Catholics who were supportive of that initial law.
I'm sure there were Catholics looking at it. Most of them haven't read it, as we have, and seen that it's problematic, especially with what we're doing now with the disaster relief
Well,
efforts.
even the sacraments. I mean, if you were baptizing, for instance, if I come to you and I'm an alien that's come to your diocese and I want my baby baptized, you have to obviously fill out paperwork and keep a record of that. That could place you in jeopardy right there, couldn't it?
If it was subpoenaed and they found that we in some way harbored or concealed their identity, possibly. I just confirmed to Guatemalans this past Sunday, I don't know their identity in terms of where they are in this, but if they were undocumented, it could be problematic for me confirming them, because there's a party afterwards where we serve them food and welcome them. So it's a fine line, Raymond, but it's a reality. And the people that work with me that are attorneys and heading my social service office say, they're a little nervous about working in this area anymore. So we had to do something, and not just ourselves, Episcopalians and the Methodists felt the same way. Now, it's not that this is the only issue we take on.
No, but this is a national, you step back and look at the national scene. We're seeing this on the healthcare front. We see Catholic orphanages closing down in parts of the Northeast and all across the country, having run afoul of same-sex marriage laws. This seems to be a phenomenon of the federal government and local governments running into religious freedom and practice.
Correct, and the church needs to speak up and loudly, and unfortunately, in this situation, we have to do it by September 1st or we're criminals acting on behalf of our religion. So freedom of religion needs to be emphasized more directly. Now, we know we as bishops have made mistakes in a lot of areas, and we're paying the price for that in terms of the criticism. But on certain areas, we're right on, and we need to stand firm and boldly speak out, and this is one of them.
Very good. Bishop Robert Baker, go ahead.
Can I say also, it's not only the only issue we're concerned about as a diocese, is also the other issues you've talked to Carl Anderson about, and we want to also speak in favor of the Manhattan Declaration, which is an ecumenical effort to get people to sign on to helping all these other issues you're speaking of be addressed as well, because we're losing the battle on the culture of life.
And the Manhattan Declaration calls for what?
It calls for basically supporting family life, the proper understanding of marriage, protection of life, and the protection of religious freedoms, just what we talked about. So help us on that too, Raymond.
Very good.
Thanks for allowing me on.
Thank you, Bishop. The Justice Department and the American Civil Liberties Union are also among the groups that have filed suit against the state of Alabama's anti-immigration law. For more on the Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, and the work of Bishop Robert Baker, visit bhamdiocese.org. And we thank you for being with us. That is all the time we have until next week. You can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo or on my Facebook page. Those of you who follow me not only get previews of our shows, but additional material from our guests. And you can always find me at RaymondArroyo.com, and the links to the Facebook and the Twitter accounts are there. And V.I. Zing, America's Cultural Decline, from muffin tops to body shots, is available at retailers everywhere. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.